Hi everyone, just going to run through main characters of an Inspector Calls with you. So starting off with Mr. Birling. He represents capitalism in the play. Okay, he's a way of Priestley criticising capitalism in particular. He's selfish, he's cold, money orientated, he lacks understanding of the way that his behaviour affects others, and he just doesn't care about those below him. He doesn't change in the play, and that's important because it establishes this idea that he's unlikable because he can't learn from his mistakes. He uses his position as a magistrate to try and manipulate those around him and get away with things. He constantly just tries to avoid scandal. And remember that he thinks community is ridiculous. He says community and all that nonsense. And he makes comments like, the way these cranks talk, you'd think we're all mixed in together like bees in a hive. Even more unlikable, I would say, is Mrs. Birling. Remember that Priestley himself describes her as cold in the first description. She's calculated, unforgiving, prejudiced. She's a bully, and she belittles her own children. She's abrasive to her husband. She judges Eva for the situation that she's in without even realising that it was caused by her own child. And she judges others because she regards herself so highly, when actually her life really is not that perfect. Her husband clearly married her for money. Remember, the opening stage direction says that she is his social superior, so he has benefited financially from that. Does that imply she just married him for love and it backfired? Probably, because she also makes comments to Sheila that, busy men don't spend time at home with their wives. Her daughter doesn't even like her. They argue about things in the shop openly. Sheila feels criticised by her all of the time. She's about to be married to Gerald for family gain, clearly just like Mrs. Birling was, and Mrs. Birling isn't doing anything about that. And quite frankly, her son is a drunken mess. She doesn't change in the play either, and she even comments at one point that she's not ashamed of her behaviour, which we're meant to be very critical of. She's rude to the inspector. She tries to use her social position to intimidate him, even when the others have realised it's not a fruitful way to behave with him. And the real reason why she doesn't support Eva seems to be because Eva uses that name Birling when she appears in front of the charity panel. She's so busy trying to keep her own name out of scandal and care about the fact that Eva is daring to use her name and social image. She doesn't even really focus on the real reasons why Eva's standing in front of her. And maybe it is that self-indulgence and that prejudice that stops her from spotting that it's her own son that caused Eva's pregnancy. And that's Priestley's way of attacking social perception of those in need. That idea that they're seen as something beneath the rich. Remember that she comments that Eva is a girl of that class. And the processes that the people in need have to go through. Think about that charity panel. Mrs. Birling humiliates Eva. She asks her questions about not having a husband, how she's ended up in that situation. She takes pleasure in making her feel uncomfortable. Gerald. Gerald. He's a little bit more complex, but equally as frustrating. At the beginning of the play, we like him. Even his affair with Eva seems to have some form of redeeming quality. It seems to come from some kind of love. But by the end, he's a complete letdown. He appears trapped by his own social position. His affair with Eva implies that he wants a different life. But remember, the most significant reason why he could never be with her is social class. And he doesn't throw caution to the wind. He conforms. He says no to that relationship and he lets it deteriorate, and he goes back to marrying Sheila. He's constantly introduced by his relationship with his father and his father's status, even when he meets the inspector. Maybe that implies that there's a restriction to his life. There's an implication that he works in his father's shadow. Maybe that's showing the difficulties that men at that time had if they had positions of authority. Perhaps his father's position isn't actually helpful to him. Perhaps it restricts him. Even his affair with Eva shows likeable parts of his personality. I mean, he gives her shelter, food. He's very tender with her, very kind. But is it driven by love for her, or is it driven by a chance to be a different person? Remember that Sheila makes that very cutting comment that he probably saw himself as a fairy prince. Is that true? Did he find self-indulgence in it? Does it allow him to be something positive or to like himself? But that changes. He's the first person to work out that the inspector's not real, and he laps it up. He's happy to accept that there's no scandal, no one needs to find out. He thinks he can just go back to marrying Sheila as if nothing ever happened. He sides with the older generation of the Birling family, showing that all hope for Gerald is pretty much lost and he'll end up just like them. Remember that whilst the play was set in 1912, it's written in 1945, and Priestley is trying to encourage social change after the war. Gerald Priestley's fear for the future generation, that they'll have this chance to change things, but they won't take it. They'll go back to old habits because it's easier. And then there's Eric. He is constantly contrasted against Gerald, and at the start, that's a very negative contrast. Eric is immature, he's a drunken youth, an outcast from his own family, he has a turbulent relationship with his father, he forces himself on Eva, he even steals from his dad to try and cover up his mistakes. He leaves the house to escape the inspector, doesn't take responsibility at the beginning, but by the end that's changed drastically. He comes back. And unlike Gerald when he comes back from his walk, Eric comes back willing to accept his part in Eva's death, and he openly confronts his mother for turning her away. He's angry at the way Eva's been treated. He says he won't forget what he did. He even comments, "I did what I did," and that use of those first person pronouns clearly indicates his complete acceptance of his own mistakes. He even goes on to argue against the older generation when they try and cover it up, saying that things can't go back to before, that he's going to side with Sheila. And that's crucial to the plot. Think about that drastic transformation from drunk to responsible citizen. If Eric can learn social responsibility, anyone can. He's Priestley's hope for the future generation. He's not a letdown like Gerald. He is a new generation taking responsibility and pushing social change, even if it's uncomfortable. Sheila, her transformation is just as drastic and just as important as Eric's. At the start of the play, she is completely immature and, let's be honest, quite irritating. She even calls her parents mummy and daddy, showing that she has this reliance on them. She's image obsessed, and that is shown again in her her unfair treatment, really, of Eva. The reason that she goes against Eva is because Eva's beautiful and she's jealous. The first thing that we find out is that she's pretty, so she's clearly judged just by her image, and she's controlled by everybody around her. Her mother tells her what to wear at Millward, her father clearly chooses her husband, even her ring is selected by Gerald. Remember that comment she makes? "Oh, Gerald, is it the one you wanted me to have?" But by the end, she's independent. She's gone from calling them mummy and daddy to mother and father. She hasn't agreed to marry Gerald. She actively campaigns with her brother to get her parents to admit to their mistakes and change their behaviour. She's also the most supportive character of the inspector. She takes on his lessons entirely, and once again she shows this idea of a future that Britain could have if it allows a new generation to change things. She's the first to emphasise that Eva is important and recognise this chain of events that occur. She constantly says to the others that things might not have happened if, and she reflects on the things that they have shared with each other that night. She also makes that comment to her mum that you can't put up a wall between us and Eva. She recognises that everybody is equal. And it's also important to remember that she becomes more independent as a woman, and that's another crucial factor. Think about the discussions of gender in the play. By the end of that play, Sheila has gone from a young woman who has her life decided for her and is used by her family to make social connections, to someone who makes her own decisions and refuses to settle for what others want for her. And she has her own voice. She gets her own vote. The inspector, he is a voice of socialism in the play. He teaches others this idea that everybody's actions can have an impact on those around them, and that because of that we have a social responsibility to think about the way we behave and the way that we could influence the lives of others. He's not influenced or intimidated by the social position of other characters, no matter how hard they try, and he continues to do what he sees as the right thing, confronting them despite the fact that they say that they could cause trouble for him. He also enables the plot to move forward. We have to remember that this is a play, and by questioning the other characters, he allows the next part of the plot to take place. That in itself illustrates this idea of a chain of events. Remember that Eva goes from hardship because of one character to hardship because of the actions of another. And it encourages the audience to spot connections in the play. And he's basically Priestley's mouthpiece in the play. He allows Priestley to speak his own political views. Priestley's a socialist, and Inspector Gould is the voice of that throughout the play, challenging the capitalist members of the play and the audience, to be honest, and causing social change. I hope that's been helpful. As always, you can head over to the website if you need any further support revision resources, and there are other videos. There's a key quotation video for an Inspector Calls on the channel if you need it.